what I've tried to do with the setup here is sort of have a bit of a diversity of people from, intergenerational dialogue, right, from across age ranges. So we've got 2 students from a local high school, 2 university students, and 2 people from the community with a better vintage, right, than the rest of us. And so first, I will. The wheels were turning very quickly in there as to how do I say that. So Lucas Czerkewski, if you don't mind coming up, and I think I probably mispronounced your name, so you can correct me when you get up there, who is going to share first his story of housing growing up in this community, Kitchener-Waterloo, and what it all entailed. And so the part of the objective here is to learn how others were housed over their lifetime, right? But also then for us to sort of think, well, what is our housing story and how do we end up where we are today in terms of affordability and housing outcomes as a product of where we sort of started from. So I'll hand it over to you, Lucas, and I'll give you a little bit. Part of my job here is to kind of facilitate, so I'll give you a bit of a wave when you're at your 5 minutes, all right? Perfect. You good to go?
Thank you very much. It's Czerkewski, Lucas Czerkewski. So I suppose I'm here to represent the high school perspective, a high school student perspective, and give some idea of what it is that people of my generation might be interested in knowing about housing in the future. And we were given a few questions to go through and to think about and to talk about as it came to the issue of housing. And so just kind of start off, one of the first questions was, what kind of housing did I grow up in as a child? And for me, the answer is very simple. I've lived in the same house pretty much my whole life. It's a simple family home. The 4 people in my family live there. It's been in good repair. It's built in the mid-'80s or so. Elementary school was a close walk. It was about 2 minutes from the front door to the door of my school. High school, where I attend now, I'm in my 3rd year now. It's a bit further away. I take public transit every day to get there. A school bus is offered if I want to take it, but I long ago decided that I much preferred getting around by public transit than by kind of more strict timelines that a school bus forces on me. I'll talk a bit about transit, I suppose, and those other issues a bit later on. But looking at the actual house that I live in itself, and whether it's appropriate for my family, and whether it's of enough space and all that. When it comes to living in a family home, I think probably the ideal situation is if every person in that family can have a room where they can be alone from everyone else when they need that. And so I'm fortunate in that regard, in that I can go to my own space if I need it. My sister can. Both my parents have their own spaces as well. And so I think in that regard, my family home definitely kind of meets the standard for what I'm looking for right now. In the future, in terms of what kind of housing I want to live in, where I want to go, in the immediate future, university in the next few years, I expect I want to live in a more urban, more densely populated area. Currently, I live in the suburbs of Waterloo. I can smell the manure from the cornfield, from the field in St. Jacobs in the mornings. And ideally, I wouldn't smell manure anymore wherever I'm at next. And kind of, I guess, what I mean by that is that I'd like to live in a place where I'm much closer to a variety of opportunities and where I can get around without necessarily having to take public transit or to drive places if I want to get there quickly. I'm a big fan of walking, and so really important to me is seeing opportunities to be able to walk. And also in that vein, I'm a big fan of nature and finding a balance between our time inside and our time outside. And wherever I can, I look for opportunities. So, how can we get more of that time outside, more of that time in nature, given our housing situation? And so kind of in that vein, where I see myself wanting to move in the future is to live in a space where the housing I look for isn't so much the space I'm going to live in inside, but it's what opportunities are available to me outside. So it's looking at that housing in context. see, I can change the furnishings inside, I can do all that, but it's much more difficult to change the opportunities available to me around my house. And when it comes to outdoor space, what I really see as valuable are public spaces. So, I never really use my backyard at my house. And so it's much more interesting to me to have public walkways and to have community gardens and ideas like that, and to have even permissive land use policies, so we can free roam policies and that kind of idea, so we can get around and kind of spend more time outside of our own homes. Because as nice as it is to have a place to sleep at night, I see it as much more valuable to get out into the community whenever possible. So I suppose to wrap up a little bit, the big question here is, what's the greatest housing challenge that faces my generation? I'm not sure it's fair for me to talk for my generation. But given my background, that I've always lived in a suburban house, that kind of thing, I'd like to find some way with my housing situation in the future where I can be closer to various amenities and opportunities and get around by walking to them ideally, but also to be able to have that quick and easy access to public outdoor spaces. Like I said, community gardens, parks, and to be able to get out into nature as much as possible without it being too inconvenient. I think that's about it.
And we're at 5 minutes exactly, so
Perfect.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. Yes, thank you. And next up is Bailey Griffin, who is also a local secondary student, who's going to tell us about his housing story.
Thank you. All right, so I'm Bailey Griffin. I'm from WCI, and I was born in Cambridge in a lower density, kind of lower wealth community on the outskirts of town. So I've moved to Waterloo recently when I was 4 years old, and I moved to a more medium wealth, again, low density suburb near St. Jacobs on the border of Waterloo. So my area, which I've been living in for 13 years, has been developed, hasn't really been developed much from when I moved in. So it's a rather old kind of community as compared to some of the other residential areas around where I live. But some of the areas around me have really developed as compared to my area. So back in 2001, before I started attending public school, there was a public school that was put into place around my area called North Lake Woods, and it was about a 5-minute walk from where I live, and even to this day, the school bus that drops me back off at my house stops there, and I walk from that public school back to my house. So that was implemented in 2001, and I attended there, and then I went to WCI afterwards. So the biggest change in my neighborhood has been the traffic systems. So there's a larger street going through several neighborhoods from where I live, and so across this large street, there used to be a neighborhood that had around 4 to 5 houses in it, and behind it was a large plot of land. And now it's a housing district of hundreds of houses, and it's really developed. So this has really affected traffic from around where I live, and you can really see the changes in how you have to drive, and the streets have become bigger, and the traffic systems have had to change in order to incorporate all this new traffic. So one of the bigger ones is intersections. So a bigger intersection from where I live is there's a left turn lane that has been implemented, and the intersection has become bigger. And then down the street there's another traffic light, and a advanced right turn lane has been implemented as well. So these changes can really be seen as a kind of reaction to having a bigger neighborhood. So overall, the area that I live in hasn't been changed too much if you just look at it, but the areas around it and the traffic systems around it has been changed dramatically.
Thank you very much. Excellent, thank you. And we will move now to our university students, and we'll start with Erin Reed, who's in applied health? Health studies, all right. Here you go.
Thank you. Hello? Okay, so my name is Erin. As he said, I'm in my 1B term of health here at Waterloo. So my childhood home was actually a 2-bedroom farmhouse in a small agricultural town called Leamington, formerly the tomato capital of Canada, but since Heinz has left, we are looking to other ventures. So it was definitely a fixer-upper, the house that I lived in. It has since been renovated, and but it was enough room for our family. There was 5 people. I have 2 siblings, and then my mom and my dad. So what I think made the difference was a large backyard. It was about 15 acres. Our driveway is about 1 kilometer long, and my dad jokingly would tell the people that I'm good at cross country because I just run down the driveway to get to the bus every morning. So there's no public transit system where I grew up, and now coming to Waterloo and having a public transit system, drawing upon what Lucas said, for me, having public transit was actually a luxury, let alone walking is something that I haven't even considered yet. Being able to go on the bus is actually something that I found was pretty cool. Looking ahead, I think that the biggest housing challenge for me will be looking to find something similar. I know that a 15-acre plot will not be a reality if I want to work around Waterloo or a larger city. As I grow older, I think a big backyard would be ideal. Again, the green space, having a place to play. You don't have to have the most amount of space inside, but having that large space to play and roam was very important. Coming from a health background, I know that where I live can affect my overall well-being. And the security of where you live also affects that. So I hope in the future that the security and the affordability of our housing, the green space around it, will further my well-being rather than hinder it. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. And next up is Shalaka Jadha, who's one of our planning students at the university here.
Hello. So I'm going to take a little bit more of a thematic approach in terms of explaining a little bit about my story. I just want to start with saying thank you to my parents. My dad's here, so hi, Dad. So my name is Shalaka, as Dr. Moses mentioned, and I currently study planning at the University of Waterloo. So my developing research interests lie in public health and exploring the intersection of the environment with the economy. I've been especially drawn to the dynamics of housing, as these dynamics help develop the physical context in which we will operate within for the next forever, really. So housing choices are often dictated, however, by social goals. So I will be outlining my childhood observations of my homes in India, in the Middle East, and as well as my observations of the patterns of gentrification and social inequality that have been perpetuated by the growing intergenerational gap. So as a child, I grew up in 2 homes, one in India and one in the United Arab Emirates. Home in Nagpur, India is a multi-family home where I live with my extended family. We habitually used to head to the roof where my mom would recall stories of her and her friends adjusting the TV antenna when she was younger during major cricket games. And this is the home that is filled with memories of catching auto rickshaws from the street corners and walking to local businesses and treating ourselves to daily made ice creams and racing to finish them before the heat would melt them all. In Dubai, our housing situation found us in a large 3-bedroom condominium where our housing situation was incredibly comfortable, as my parents had allowances from work for housing and travel, which is a practice that is very commonplace for white-collar workers in Dubai. But I could not independently navigate the city, as a city as hot as Dubai was not conducive to active transportation, and learning how to ride a bicycle would require you to actually decide that you're willing to leave your house in 40 degrees Celsius weather to be physically active. So yes, I will admit to not knowing how to ride a bicycle. So in fact, physical activity until the major expat migration was not accommodated for through built form in Dubai. Parks and beaches were most usable only in the wintertime or when the sun really set. However, a lot of these statements no longer really stand, as the push to modernize has borrowed from many North American concepts, such as indoor skiing, of course, if you are familiar at all with the concept of ski Dubai. So there is a definitive difference between the social ties and development between my childhood homes. In one, I was surrounded constantly by people I know, my mind always humming with districts that I'd like to visit during my spare time, where I could fawn over the library-style setup of beautiful saris in the shops. However, and when I was home in India, I felt connected very deeply to each place, and I was constantly home. In Dubai, however, novelty was the talking point behind each place. You visited places to kind of just say that you've seen them. And I found the magnitude of some of the landmarks in Dubai very disconcerting, where the lines between a community center and a community-centered strip mall were pretty blurred. And in Dubai, the memories of places are really overcast by the resonance that I had of memories of people, my family and friends, which is kind of a cool benefit to those settings. So when I was 9 years old, my mom and I migrated to Mississauga while my dad continued to work in Dubai. And although we had our challenges, my family discussed our place of relative privilege quite often, as our first home in Canada was in a middle-class suburb undergoing gentrification. Now, the neighborhood boasted green, lively spaces and community centers and social mixing. However, following the economic investments in Mississauga's downtown, housing prices increased, pushing lower-income families out of the area. Cities often represent conflict over scarce urban places, and the consequence of this conflict is often social exclusion. Our family was able to stay due to our relative class privilege. However, at age 9, I did not understand the changing demographics of my classmates and neighbors. However, as I've grown older, I've been able to name the disappearance of people of color and poorer neighbors. Gentrification truly divides communities by class lines and by intentionally influencing the affordability of housing, services, and other costs of living. Growing up around people with access to the same social circles, activities, and education truly perpetuates the privilege and ability to exist and relate to other people in the same class. This recognition of relative income privilege is a major turning point in my recognition of how housing will be impacted by intergenerational factors. Gentrification will impact my generation in the unique manner where we recognize its pitfalls, but we will often serve as the reason for gentrification through our embracing of the creative class culture and in our rejection of the suburbs. In looking at the city of Waterloo as such an example, the presence of highly reputable post-secondary institutions has really transformed the land use of the city. Student demand for housing continues to transform the landscape of the campus, where campus residences themselves find themselves expanding, as well as major regional corridors are now littered with high-rise residents for students. The expected student growth and retention has even helped pave the way for the light rail transit system, which is aligned with the fear of increasing property values and relocating many residents. So gentrification hasn't just changed cities, but also how we expect to see our cities. As a student who has lived off campus, on campus, and currently as a resident on, I'm truly unsure if ethical housing options are even feasible. How can I personally balance price, safety, proximity to amenities, transit options without expecting the solution to be influenced by gentrification? Moving forward, I want to see the work that is cognizant of economic segregation. Local residents rarely help plan revival solutions, and rather tired suburban facades are replaced with a newly prescribed diversity of built form that really fails to support the diversity of its truest form, its people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Up next is Dr. Graham Brown, who is a Kitchener-Waterloo resident and also happens to be the principal at St. Paul's College here at the university.
Thank you. So I've been asked to speak about the housing I grew up in, so let me do that. I guess over the years as a growing up, undergraduate, graduate, career that spanned working at 3 different universities, I've probably been in about 15 different homes or housing situations. The one that I grew up in was kind of a suburb of Toronto. It was a standalone home. It had a large plot of land associated with it, not the size of Aaron's, but probably take you about an hour to cut the grass. There was a huge 100-acre field at the end of the garden to play in, shoot squirrels with my BB gun, and do all kinds of stuff like that. It was a real sad day when that became a subdivision for some fortunate developer. I shared a room with a brother for a while, and then had my own room. unlike the students here and Aaron, who took buses, of course, in those days I had to slog through snow and sleet for miles in order to walk to school, back for lunch, and back to school for the afternoon, and it was terrible. But we, we did it. And it was, 5 or 10 minute walk or so to school, not that much further on a bicycle to a strip mall where there were convenience stores, that sort of thing. Public transit wasn't all that close. We didn't really think too much about that. It wasn't an issue. You had to make a little bit further trek in order to go to a movie. So it was. I remember it as great. It was hard, actually, in some ways, to move out of that situation. Plenty of space for everyone in our family of 4. So, what does my generation, I guess, from my perspective, see as sort of future housing challenges? My family now lives in actually a fairly similar type of situation. My wife and I have 2 boys who've grown up and are out now in the work world. Our house is probably too large for us, I suppose. But the cost of downsizing in terms of space and having centrally managed services like snow shoveling or something like that into a condo, you don't save any money. As a matter of fact, it may cost you more, and exposes you, I think, to legal, or it exposes you to decisions made by a board over which you have very little control and which could be quite expensive. There's the potential of rental, I suppose, and at some point to downsize. But I think that's one of the big challenges in my estimation. The growing up in the suburbs was interesting from the point of view that both my wife and I suppose, in different parts of Canada, grew up in similar situation, but it didn't have much effect on our own preference for housing. We happened to be in a suburb in Waterloo, but that's because Waterloo just is a suburb, and in a sense, or at least when we moved in a few years ago. But we much prefer urban housing. I went to urban universities in different countries. We lived for a long time. Our first house was a sort of an urban situation, talking over the back fence. We much prefer the life of the city, even though we grew up in suburbs. How to duplicate that in the current situation when we do decide to maybe sell the house and downsize is a concern. The second concern, and then I'll sit down, is at some point we could be interested in some sort of assisted living situation, retirement home as they call it now, or retirement home with assisted living. I'm very familiar with these because both my wife and I have parents who've been very, very much engaged in that, and I don't like anything I've seen. It's not an attractive situation. And my friends of my generation, when they talk about this, they talk about, couldn't we all get together and buy something together? They want to be with people they trust and know. Although, of course, they don't live with them now. They may find actually with living with each other may be a very different story. Many undergraduates have moved out of residence with a few close friends only to find they're not so friends anymore when they're living in a flat. So those are 2 challenges. Is retirement living with some assistance really going to be attractive? Is there going to be something available? Is it going to be affordable? Prior to that, what about downsizing? Does it make any sense? Thank you.
Last but not least is Debbie Reibling, also a long-term Kitchener-Waterloo resident, and she can tell you more about her history and housing in the community here.
Good afternoon. I was born in 1956, and I was raised here in Kitchener-Waterloo. My parents had 5 children, and I was the 3rd child. My father was a bricklayer, and my mother was a stay-at-home parent. And we only rented older houses. They had bigger rooms, larger yards, and the maintenance was minimal. And the owners took care of that, or my father was able to do that. But during the 50s, there were not very many apartment buildings, and they had very minimal townhouses. On top of that, my mother would take in boarders to help subsidize my father's income, which meant that we shared rooms with our siblings. I remember one time I shared a room with my 3 sisters, and my brother slept in the hall because we had 4 boarders. Renting was the only option and the cheapest office for the need for our family. I never really had my own room until my siblings moved out and I was a teenager. My first school was Sotheby, and we walked to school, and my mother made sure that wherever and whenever we moved, we were close to school. Downtown Kitchener had supermarkets then, Dominion stores, and they had 4 theaters. I remember the Fox Theater and the Odeon. I don't remember the other ones. It was 50 cents to go to the movies, cheap babysitting for my mom. And we used to take the transit, but there was the trolley then, Kitchener trolley, and then later the transit. My father had a work truck, and we used to climb on the back of that to go. No seatbelts. I do believe we had adequate spaces because the homes were larger then. At one time, we lived in Breslau for 2 years, and it had 4 bedrooms, and it was on a 2-acre lot, and we actually got to have a pony. Then, during the 60s, we moved back, and in that 2 years' time, the city had changed enough. They were putting up townhouses, so we lived in a townhouse, but on Blucher Street. But I didn't like it as much because the front street was concrete, your front of your house was concrete, and the backyard was like a postage stamp that just had enough room for my mom's clothesline. When I was 19, around 19, I decided to move to New Brunswick to work for the summer, and I ended up staying and getting married and going to college. And when we were done, we said, what are we going to do for housing? There wasn't a lot of options. We didn't have any debt, but there wasn't a lot of options. So we were very lucky to run into a lady that was a widower, and she had 2 houses, and she wanted to sell one of the houses. So she allowed us to rent to own. So we put a small down payment, and the first year we lived in the house, all the equity from our rent went to pay for the down payment. And after the first year, we went to the bank and financed the rest. I believe it was around $20-some thousand, but the interest rate was 13 to 15%. Many years later, I moved back to the Waterloo area, and I now live on Fisher Holman in a house. My husband and I have recently purchased condos to subsidize our income. And we're hoping to keep the same standard by having this income, but we do have to pay taxes, condo fees, maintenance, and insurance. Recently, I went to our condos to pick up our rent check, which is a nice thing to do. And I seen a sign just before we got to the condos, and it said rent to own house. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that that is still an option for young people today that can't afford a big house, big property. But that was really interesting. The greatest challenge for my husband and I is we're just a little bit too young to go into a nursing home, and we are still able to currently maintain our home. However, we have talked about the options, and we reflect on the choices that our parents have recently made. My mother-in-law, who passed away 5 years ago at the age of 87, first moved from a 3-bedroom house on Lexington Road to the Laurelwood luxury living. Her meals were cooked for her, and she had her own apartment within the facility. This facility did not have any nursing care. It was very costly at $2,600 a month, and she lived there for about 4 years. Then when her health failed, she moved into Columbia Forest into a single private room. The cost was around $2,000 a month, but it had full nursing care. It was very small, and she liked the extra care, but she complained that the room was small and the lack of privacy. My own mother, who is soon to be 88, is still living in her own 2-bedroom apartment on Erb Street. She is quite capable of keeping it clean, and my sister helps her with the bills. There are 4 siblings left, and we each take 1 week of the month to take care of her needs. Her hair appointments, her clothes, her shopping, doctors, groceries. There is also services that she can have and use that would deliver her groceries if she wanted it. Her fears are that she doesn't want to go into a nursing home and only live in one room. She said that's okay for others, but not for her. Her financial situation is not the same as my mother-in-law's, so her choices will be different. More than likely, she will be in a funded government nursing home. Today, I must conclude that my husband and Dwight and myself are having to make some really tough decisions, but we don't want someone else to make them for us. For the next few years, like 10 to 15 years, the way that prices are going up for these luxury living, we hope that we are able to stay in our home and that we will get the services that we would like, lawn cutting, health care services. And another concern that I have, and that we've talked about, if we have the finances, is that we will be able to stay. That is our goal. But we also have 3 daughters. Will they be willing to help us if we need help? Will they be willing to help us sell our house, move, and sell our content? So in conclusion, my goal is to stay in the house as long as we can, and I thank you for listening.
Well, I would like to thank all the panelists for volunteering to come speak here today. And I only knew Shalaka because she's a student in our planning program, and I've met everybody else through our call for people. So it's really interesting to hear from all of you, and meeting you today for the first time, and now feeling like I actually know quite a bit about your history. And thank you for sharing that with everyone here today. And that hopefully this gets us all sort of warmed up, so to speak, and in our own minds thinking about, well, what is our own housing history and what challenges may we face as we move forward in that housing trajectory.